Holy shit. Today we are talking about naked pilots and people having sex in the mall. Today's episode does not disappoint, and this is part 2 of my chat with my friend Bill. If you haven't checked out part 1 yet, I'll link it right here. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation.
This one ended up on the Today Show.
Oh,
that's where I'm going to start.
Okay. I heard a funny story about the Today Show today.
Oh, really?
About Cher. Did you hear this story?
Yeah.
So Cher was apparently on the Today Show this morning, and apparently one of the producers said that she could cuss if she wanted to because they had it on delay. They did not have it on delay.
She dropped the F-bomb?
She dropped the F-bomb this morning on the
Go
Today
Cher.
Show. So, there you go.
Love her. This was back in the days before Matt Lauer was a creep.
Always was.
Yeah. And then Katie Couric actually read what horrified me at the time, but I digress. So I was, my job was investigating harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination throughout this company. Again, my favorite airline. And so I'd fly all over and ask people very awkward questions about stuff they did at work. So this was not an actual complaint. We heard about that it could have happened, which then prompted an investigation. So even if it wasn't a complaint, we were still responsible because we could have been like, hey, you should have known this was a problem, right? So I go out there and I'm talking to the witness, and I'm just going to cut to the chase. So the story was that the captain and the first officer were butt naked in the cockpit. Which
during a flight,
there's so many jokes that just write themselves.
Yeah.
Yes, I was referring to cockpit.
I missed that one.
You didn't even
right over. I was like, during
I told
the
you
flight?
all you have to do is laugh at my joke.
First of all, that's really cold. Second of all,
100%.
I mean, I'm always freezing on a plane. I have like 7 layers on a plane. How are they sitting?
Well, they weren't. So it was a process. So they basically, the captain said to the FO, which I don't understand how this goes, right? We've just met and hey, let's play a joke on the flight attendants. And every time we call them up, we have less clothes on until we're totally naked.
There's no scenario in which this is a good idea.
No.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how somebody agrees to that.
Or thinks it up.
Yeah. You say again, so many questions. Maybe I don't want any of the answers. I don't know. So, this starts happening. They kept saying, bring me another soda. Right. And so at last they only have their neckties on and their underwear. And I'll tell you in a minute how I know this is tucked up under the on the visor hanging down. So, the flight attendant not trying to create evidence. And again, back in the day, didn't have a phone camera, had a disposable camera and snapped a picture. Mm-hmm. So, and just for context, it was, if I'm the captain, it was taken this way.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to paint the picture. So I'm talking to her. She gives me the picture.
So you have evidence.
So it's amazing evidence. Now, and
nobody was photoshopping back then.
No, this was just straight raw footage, so to speak. So you couldn't see anything.
Sure.
Except you could tell just that you could see skin all the way down, right?
Where you shouldn't have.
Correct. Yeah. On so many levels. So I find myself then in front of or interviewing both the captain and the first officer separately. And I'm with the FO, and his reaction was, because I didn't show him, I didn't lead with the picture. I led with, this is what was said to have occurred. What's your response? And what's your side of the story? And he said, oh, well, what happened was, when somebody starts with that sentence, what happened was they're going to lie.
Yeah.
They're just teeing up a lie. Well, in his case, he said that he had dumped a bowl of soup that he had bought on the layover into his lap, which then caused him to have to get out of his clothing, but he was confident he had his boxers on. So at that point, I just slid the photo across the table. And his first response was, well, clearly I need to shave my back. I was like, what?
Not helping.
I'm just going to put that over here because we're not talking about manscaping. So he was still doubling and tripling down, and I'm just like, okay, you didn't, even to make your story plausible, your luggage is not in the cockpit with you. It's back here and probably, in the front of the aircraft.
Right.
But so you would have had to go get that or have somebody bring it to you. None of that occurred. Your story's got so many holes in it. And anyway, so, he goes on his way. The captain, I think, avoided me, as I recall. I don't recall actually interviewing him, but he also was alleged to, like, he used to bring massage oil in his flight bag. And then there was the overnights. So many things, right? So they get fired, as you would, probably not surprisingly. But what happens after that was there's a system board, what it's called. It's a review with the union, and basically it's like a court. And so on the one side of the room, big room, was the company. So the chief pilot, kind of like the attorneys for the prosecution.
Sure.
And over here, you've got the union with the defense. And then the board is 2 members of the union and 2 company executives that would make the decision, right? So the funny part was, which nobody knew at the time, the woman on the board for the company, she used to be my boss. And she and I, we were as thick as thieves, but I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. And I was there to testify on behalf of my report.
Sure. Yeah.
So, part of my report did say that in addition to wildly inappropriate, you being totally naked, in this setting, any setting, was that it was a safety hazard, and that I had blown up the picture and the altimeter said 27,000 feet. So that's a problem, right? And so the union gets up and they kind of act like these lawyers. It's almost like, Law and Order.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes you qualified was very boisterous, in him trying to intimidate. And I'm not going to lie, I was sweating bullets. It was ice cold in this room, but I like my undershirt was dripping wet. And what makes you qualified to say this was safety, and it was like citing line 45 on page 62 of your report, that type of thing. And so I took a deep breath and I said the following. Well, I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and I have minors in aviation safety, aviation business, and air traffic control. And so my old boss, I saw the corner of her mouth just start to go up.
Yep.
And all he responded was, "Oh, so you've flown an aircraft?" "Yes, I have my private pilot's license. I know what an altimeter looks like."
It reminds me of the scene from My Cousin Vinny when she identifies the tire treads.
Yeah.
And they don't think that she understands what the difference between the tires are on that particular model of, I forget, Ford or whatever. And everybody is so impressed. And that ends basically like seals the case and they're innocent.
Yeah.
In which your case, they were guilty. But
yeah.
So,
yeah. So all that happened. We get through that. I learned a lot about so much there. But so they got their jobs back.
Of course.
And, I'm actually very, as an aside, I'm pro-union. But sometimes I think it's jumped the shark where they do, it's more than just bargaining for good, and I'm going to get hate in the comments, for good wages or benefits or any of that. It just becomes more than I think it should be, in my humble opinion. So anyway, weeks later, I run into the chief pilot, who was such a nice man. And he knew I was kind of like, not beating myself up, but it wasn't traumatic, the whole thing, but it was a process, right? It was impactful. And he's like, I will never say I told you this. I'll deny it. He said, everything in your report was totally spot on and thorough, and you were totally right. But blah, blah, blah.
It's hard to refute facts,
Right.
Altimeters and
but they still got
safety.
Their job. They still got their jobs back. So, I did find out years later that the captain ended up getting paid to go away because it was probably, I don't know all the specifics, but it was probably a pattern of events, of behavior, as it were.
Well, Marissa Tomei, I believe you. So.
Marissa Tomei, yeah. But but then I'm getting, it was a ritual. I would watch the Today Show every morning, right? Wake up with Katie, Matt, Ann, and Al. And suddenly she's talking about this. So I go into work. I'm like, it was not me.
So they were talking about on the Today Show.
They were running this as
Okay.
And I've Googled since, and there's articles from like the Dallas Morning News so I don't feel remotely uncomfortable saying any of this.
Yeah.
It's been so long, but yeah, I was just like, oh my God, now I'm freaking out. And when I got sued in the process by the pilots.
Oh, wow.
And I avoided the process server.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like 3 months, maybe even more.
How do you avoid a process server? Like
well,
you're
when
like
you hear
on the
them knock
run.
at the door, you kind of just peek out your upstairs window.
And you just ignore it?
I ignored it, yeah.
I've always been curious about that. Like you see it in movies, you see it in TV shows where people just don't answer the door or they run out the back or they jump in another car. I mean, was it like that?
I didn't. Well, the front door was not like I lived in a gated community. So the garage was behind the gate, but the front door wasn't. So I could come and go that way. And then, so I avoided it. And the company, since it was part of my job, the company would indemnify me.
Yeah.
But, and then it became a little bit of a game.
I was going to ask you that next. Was a little bit like
we worked very closely with the legal department, and some of the lawyers like, did you get caught today?
Right.
And it was a little freaked out about it, right?
Yeah.
It was like,
because they can show up anywhere, correct? Like you could literally be leaving the grocery store and they bump you and they just have to ask you. I mean, has it where they just say like, are you Rob, whatever?
That's what I've seen on the movies.
Yeah. And then if you acknowledge, then they hand it to you. Right. But they can't like there can't be trickery.
No.
Is my understanding from a legal standpoint. They can't like, do something like they trip and fall and the envelope falls out and then you pick it up and say, oh, you dropped this. And they're like, you're served. My understanding is they can't do things like that.
I avoided the whole thing.
So
my only context is like yours from watching TV.
Okay. Well, we probably need to figure that out because then you need to figure out like how well you did at the avoidance. Like, are you giving yourself gold stars for this 3 months or in the game of avoiding
and I also
processing?
traveled a lot, so they couldn't, like, if I got to the airport behind security, they can't get
you there.
So
they're not going to pay for some guy to get in a seat on a plane that they know you're going to be on.
Yeah.
And be like, pass the pretzels. And
I still consider
papers.
it a win that I avoided them. But it was funny and absurd, especially when I got back to the office the first time in interview and I had the picture. And, all of us investigators, which to set the scene was, 2 males, myself and another guy who we were pretty much the same age. 2 younger women, probably at the time in their 20s. Somebody who was like my age now. So she was in her late 50s. I'm not in my late 50s, but she was at the time. And then we had, this other woman who had more energy than all of us, but she was in her late 60s at the time. And so we found ourselves discussing weird topics with her, who was kind of like talking to your grandma.
Yeah.
So here I am pushing this forward this picture of this naked man in a cockpit.
It's a perfect setup for Cards Against Humanity.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, you should probably, like some of these stories, you should do your own deck of Cards Against Humanity and test it out with some of your guests or some of your friends and see.
Yes.
I mean, you've got a pretty good chit list of being able to.
Yeah, it still never shocks me about what people have done, think of doing in the workplace or even outside the workplace. I mean, And we talked about cameras being everywhere before.
Yeah.
God knows what I would have had evidence I would have had before.
Well, especially because that incident, somebody had to actually develop that film back then, right? It was a disposable camera. So like somebody had to develop that film. Now it's so different.
Yeah, they went into Target.
Right. And the poor Target person's like, what am I looking at? Although I always felt like it would be I never saw that Robin Williams movie about him being kind of a creepo and developing the film.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but I always thought it would be interesting to sort of be the person that's developing the film. And then in some way you see this mosaic of people's life and you have to just sort of guess like, what is this about or whatever. And then you do wonder like, do they get to know their customers? Do they not? I mean, all that's sort of like a day, an era gone by, not even a day gone by.
And I'll just give you a quick other anecdote, which is talking about surveillance cameras. So actually, they were really good to me. I worked there about a year and a half. I worked at Radio Shack headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah.
And I was on the ER team, employee relations, and still investigating misconduct, all the things. So this guy called from one of the stores in my territory, and he's like, he led with this: "I'm calling to tell you that people are having sex at the store." And I'm like, I'm listening.
Yeah.
Tell me more. I have so many questions.
Why a Radio Shack?
I want to hear your story.
Yeah.
So he starts talking about it, and my office was weird. They were on the cusp when they built this new campus of the open concept, right? So nobody had offices, but we did because all of our stuff is confidential. So it was these 2 rows of offices with all the different investigators, and my friend Jewel was next to me. But the whole wall would slide instead of a door. It was kind of weird. But anyway, so I'm tethered to my phone on a headset.
Yeah.
I'm talking to this guy, and I would, of course, ask clarifying questions. And like, well, who's having sex? And he's like, my coworkers. Okay.
Oh, so they worked there.
They worked there.
Okay, they weren't customers.
They were not customers. I mean,
I know. I was going to say, like, why would somebody go to a Radio Shack and
in the transistor aisle? That's going to get you going.
But
okay,
hey.
Good. And I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum, but so I assumed he meant like the stockroom.
Sure,
That
like
seems like a plausible place. No,
the break room. Yeah,
on the sales floor.
Okay.
So now he's telling me this, and I am sending an email to loss prevention to pull the security footage.
Right.
And I said, well, how did you witness this? You know, I'm trying to understand. I'm like, help, put me in your shoes.
Yeah.
He's like, no. Well, okay, then how do you know? I know. That's what he kept saying. I know. Like, I'm really not trying to piss you off. I'm just trying to understand. How do you know? Well, they're thinking about it. So you're telling me that they're thinking about having sex with each other on the sales floor? Yes. Did they tell you this? Like, was this a plan they were having? No, I just know. So now I'm pacing in my office and I'm tethered to this phone. It was before wireless. And I'm getting louder and louder to the point Jewel opens my door.
Because like listening.
It was this back and forth. How do you know? I know. How do you know? They're thinking about it. I'm like, what is happening?
So there's not going to be anything on the camera.
There's nothing on the cameras.
Yeah.
It's him alone in the store.
Yeah.
And there was like, because he told me days that this was happening. And I was like, well, what time and whatever it was. And like, there was 2 people in the store, one of which was in the stock room doing something, and he's out on the sales floor. And there's literally nobody else there. So I mean, my whole head was, I was just enraged with this guy because it was like, you know, you can't fix stupid. And now I've decided you're the problem. The focus of my attention is entirely, on you.
Yeah, it's entirely different.
So I somehow get him off the phone. He then calls back in. There's a hotline.
Yeah,
whatever,
of course. Yeah.
And he gets my boss. And then I have since headed him off. I was like, Anita, I got to talk to you.
You're going to get this call.
Yeah. And I give her the Reader's Digest. So she avoids it for some reason. And he leaves messages. And the messages were as follows. They're very long, but a simple message. F you, F you, F you, F you. He just would literally say it constantly over and over until the voicemail like ran out.
So they had that recorded.
So it's been a while, but I forget how we found out. Oh no, in his file was a prescription for medicinal marijuana. It's like, I think we found the final piece of the puzzle. I think we found a piece of the puzzle.
I certainly don't have stories like that. There is one that comes to mind that I will share with you before we wrap, which again, the sort of like, well, that happened, or like, what surprised you? I was very surprised. I was actually working at a place in Seattle, and that day the receptionist came around the corner and said, "Bill, this person's parents are here." And I thought, oh, is it like a bring your parents to kind of work day thing? And so I immediately was like, oh, nice to meet you. You know, where does your son or daughter work? You know, here in the office. They might be at client site. And these parents kind of got stone-faced. And they're like, no. And I said, well, who's your son or daughter, you know? And I expected them to name someone that I had worked with. It was a relatively small office. And they said, oh, no. They don't work here yet. And I said, what do you mean they don't work here yet? And they said, oh, well, they're in the process of interviewing with you. And I said, okay. So how can I help you?
Right.
And they said, stone-faced, we are here to assess the work environment. And we have a few questions. I actually thought I was on candid camera. I was like, this has got to be a joke. These are 2 parents of somebody that I work with, and they're going to come jumping out of the office or the corner and laugh at me to see how I react. Unfortunately, this was true. This was a candidate who was trying to decide between employers and had sent their parents, or their parents had, invoked themselves into deciding this was going to be part of the decision, and were assessing the workplace. Once I realized it wasn't a joke and it was true, I proceeded to bring them back to the lobby and say, I think we're done here.
Yeah.
And gave them a little bit of advice, which was, you may want to talk to your child and have a discussion, because you may have just terminated their chances for employment.
Oh, 100%.
In one of the many locations they're looking at.
Revoke the offer.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if I didn't know the candidate. I don't even know if there was an offer in play, but that sort of blew my mind. Like, I couldn't believe that we were to a place where, and I've heard stories about parents calling professors. I've heard stories about parents calling deans and saying, want to argue about a grade. I had not believed it to go so far as parents showing up to a potential workplace and wanting to sit down and ask about the environment and the culture of that place on behalf of their child. And that happened.
This does not tax my imagination, because yesterday we were talking about where they accompany and expect to be in the interview with the child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that would...
No, it's not going to happen. Actually, I will end on this, and it's a recommendation for our podcast for both of you and our viewers.
Yeah.
There's these two women out of Oklahoma. It's called the I've Had It podcast. And they tell these funny stories. And one of them was, what have you hit it or had it? Right. And, one of their segments was about this. I've had it with people showing up with their parents to interviews, right?
I mean, it's definitely never happened to me, but I won't rule it out. I mean, it could still happen in the future where people show up, but I can definitely say that I don't encourage parents to show up to workplaces on behalf of their children that are interviewing.
Talk about a helicopter parent.
I mean, that's a whole nother level. So that's probably one of the shocking things that happened to me, where I honestly expected the cameras to come out and people to say, we got you.
Well, and I'm surprised, like, the mom wasn't a Karen.
No, and I remember them both being pretty docile. Like, kind of surprised at the why would this be outside the norm? Yeah. So there was no real yelling or anything like it. It was just almost like a, why wouldn't we? And I was like, wow. I'm not sure. Like,
if my father did that, I would die. I would run so far. I don't care what the offer was. I wouldn't work there.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of torpedo any opportunity for an offer, but yeah, that happened.
So if you're looking for a nugget of value here, don't bring your parents to your job interview
at all.
If they want to coach and help you work out what you're going to say, great.
Yeah.
Stay home.
Yeah. Stay home.
All right. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for the stories. I mean, you're never surprised by anything these days, but
no.
And HR is not your friend, despite what you think. HR is not your friend.
We give the illusion that we are, but
thank you.
That's why I ran away from that career.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us some comments. We do love the comments, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks again, Bill. You're always welcome back, and please come back soon. If you haven't checked out the first part of my conversation with Bill, I'll link it here. And stay tuned next week for my conversation with my friend Anthony, where we'll tackle such topics as job interviews in the buff, the walk of shame, and awkward conversations about penises. You don't want to miss this one. Check it out next week. Until then, this is Well, That Happened. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care.